Welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall, national security analyst, retired Marine intelligence officer, and host of the Strat podcast. Hal Kempfer is here to discuss a range of international issues. As always, Hal, we thank you for coming on. One of the toughest pivots in news history, going from sharing people's pets to talking about international affairs. By the way, I got to mention, Hal texted me during the commercial break saying, "This is our Pomeranian poodle." So that's what Hal has in his backyard there. What's its name, Hal?
Big poodle. Yeah. Some of the neighbors say he's unbearable.
Unbearable, yeah. That's clawsome, Hal. Let's get into some serious stuff here. Again, one of the hardest pivots in news history. Let's talk about interesting thing I saw today, Hal. There was a meeting in North Korea. Specifically, I saw Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. He spoke in North Korea today. He met the country's leader, Kim Jong Un. Relations between Russia and North Korea, Hal, have been flourishing in recent years. North Korea has supplied troops and ammunition to support Russia's war against Ukraine in return for military and economic assistance. I got to ask you, why are they doing meetings like this? Why do they need to meet in person? Why do they need to strengthen their relationship? And should the U.S. care about meetings like this?
Well, Austin, actually, the U.S. should care a lot, and I think we do. If you were to go to Indo-Pacific Command, they're watching all of this very closely. U.S. Forces Korea watching this very closely, what's going on. And there's this tightening up, if you will, of the relationship between Russia and North Korea. Now, it's always been there. It's never gone away. There's always been speculation over the years that North Korea is closer to China than it is to Russia. But I have consistently heard for decades that, never underestimate the relationship between Russia and North Korea. That's actually the biggest relationship that North Korea has with any country. And with that, the North Koreans recently, recently it was promulgated. I don't know if they formally said it, but they might send around 30,000 troops to fight in the war in Ukraine. That is a phenomenal number of troops that are going to go that direction. Obviously, South Korea is watching that very closely. South Korea just closed a deal to send tanks to Poland. And if you look at how that works, in Poland, they have a lot of older tanks that would be easily transitioned over to the Ukraine, but they want to have something, to backstop that. So they've got a bunch of T-72s that could be sent over there. They have a bunch of Leopard 2s, different variants that could be sent over there. But they want to put a first-rate, first-line tank in as a replacement. So this is the way South Korea is kind of countering it, is by putting its tanks in right on the border and freeing up Poland to transition more armor over to support Ukraine. And then Russia kind of threw out something about they were tightening up their nuclear cooperation. That's not entirely clear what that is. Of course, the big fear has always been that Russia would provide certain technology, if you will, things that North Korea needs, particularly what it needs for reentry vehicles with ballistic missiles, the warheads, if you will. That's one of the more difficult parts of ICBMs, if you are, is having the warhead go through the atmosphere at exactly the right place, not skip off the atmosphere and hit where it plans to hit. That's an area that we think North Korea has problems with. Big fear is that Russia will help them with that, which will make the North Korean nuclear arsenal, ICBM arsenal, that much more lethal, but also that make the world a lot less stable because it is more lethal.
So the United States, Hal, has consistently and strongly condemned North Korea's human rights record. Do the Russians see it that way too?
They don't care. They absolutely don't care. I've never heard of the Russians condemning the North Koreans' human rights record. The North Koreans are absolutely horrific. If you want to go back historically, in the 80s, during when they had, basically they had self-imposed famines. Yes, there were weather problems, but their collectivist farming techniques were so ineffective, so inefficient, that they actually caused a massive famine throughout North Korea. And North Korea didn't ask for outside aid. They literally let their people starve to death, and starvation has been a huge problem. In fact, I think it's they say that the average South or North Korean soldier, I said South Korean, forgive me, I meant North Korean. North Korean soldier has actually shrunk considerably in the last 40 years, and that's primarily due to malnutrition, and starvation. And that's just one of the many tools that the regime uses to stay in power, is by literally starving the population, but also imprisoning them at any moment. They just had one of their most senior military officers just kind of disappear in a sort of Orwellian twist. He just wasn't there anymore. And of course, they go through and they'll start scrubbing photos to make sure his visage is removed from photos with Kim Jong Un and others. So that's the way they are. I mean, it's a country that's kind of trapped into 1984, if I could use that Orwell book as a reference, sort of thinking that it's horrific. The U.S. speaks out, South Korea speaks out, Japan, all of our allies speak out about this, but yeah, Russia never has.
Why do the Russians need the North Koreans, and why do the North Koreans need the Russians?
Well, the North Koreans need the Russians because they want their technology. They have a old, dilapidated military ground force. In fact, everything they have that's not a nuclear weapon is old. It's poorly maintained. A lot of it's not operational. They don't really have a credible mobile force, if you will. In fact, I would say they don't have a credible military force, conventional military force at this point. Oh, it's still dangerous, and they have submarines and a variety of other things, but it is very old. So they want Russia to kind of replenish their armaments, if you will, and to improve their technology. What Russia needs is they have a rogue state that they can use for not just conventional purposes, but also for unconventional purposes, hybrid warfare type of thing, if you will. They have a state that will gladly provide them as many troops as they need. I have heard estimates that up to 100, potentially even 150,000 North Korean troops could potentially be sent into Russia. And frankly, Kim Jong Un could do that, and there wouldn't really be any domestic repercussions for doing so. So it just gives you an idea of what they can provide Russia and what Russia can provide them, the quid pro quo, and it's going to grow. As long as this war is going there, and as long as Russia is desperate for allies, it's going to grow.
What do we need to know about North Korea's military? We've been looking at the images on the screen showing some of what they have there. What is the personality, if you will, of the soldiers that come from North Korea?
Well, they are brainwashed. All right. They are dedicated to Kim Jong Un. That he's almost deified in the terms of the way they view him and his father and his grandfather. So they are completely. They just can't imagine anything but Kim Jong Un and the current regime, the current system. So, with that said, they are not in the best physical shape. Their health care is horrible. They take their troops and use them for long periods of the year as simply an agricultural labor force to help augment farms and farming. They use them for a variety of things which have nothing to do with military readiness, military training, military preparedness. And reports consistently come out that just the average stuff that any military rely on, like trucks to move troops to different guard posts and things like that the trucks break down all the time, that they have enormous maintenance issues. And a lot of it is the trucks and everything else that's that's rolling stock, if you will, to include tracked vehicles. It's old. It's really old. It's falling apart, and they don't even have that parts, if you will. Well, of course, one of the sources of parts would be to go to Russia and ask them if they can go in their military war stocks and start cannibalizing some of their older vehicles to send parts to North Korea. The problem is Russia has gone in and activated a lot of its old war stocks and sent them off to fight in Ukraine, where they have taken horrendous losses because those are not survivable platforms on the battlefield. And that kind of tells you what the conventional situation is in the Korean Peninsula, that they don't have a strong conventional force. What they have is nuclear weapons. They also have a lot of chemical weapons and other things that fall into the biological things like that, unconventional weapons, if you will. And that's always been their strong point, is unconventional weapons. And frankly, if I could say unconventional warfare, I think we call it special operations, commando raids, commando operations, things like that. That has always been their strong point.
We need to take a commercial break. We do need to touch on the Middle East. Hal and I returning in a moment.